Hello everybody, welcome to this. It's the third and final video in the unseen poetry analysis. Hopefully you've watched the previous two videos because this won't make sense without them. So have a look in the playlist that you're in and that will take you back to the other two videos. So we looked at the poem Nettles by Vernon Scannell, and then we are presented with a second poem. And the poem here is Brothers, and your exam paper will be exactly the same. You'll be presented with a second poem that you've never seen before, then a question which asks you to compare both unseen poems, but for only 8 marks. Now this is absolutely ridiculous in many ways. You've got about 10 minutes to read a second poem, to think about it, and to compare it to the first poem. Bearing in mind the first poem you've only just seen anyway. So it's a huge challenge, and because of that it's quite interesting to think about the actual mark scheme here, because you're not being assessed on AO3 context, AO4 the quality of your written communication, or AO1 your personal response and critical style. All you're being assessed on is AO2 analysis of language, form and structure. So it's actually quite an interesting approach, and you can sort of look at this this question in numerous ways, but for me, I would look at the poem. You could go through the 5-step process, which I explained in the previous videos, and which is also in my GCSE English Literature Guide at mrbruff.com or paperback on Amazon. But what I would do is I would look at the question quickly first. In Nettles and Brothers, the speakers describe feelings towards a family member. What are the similarities and differences between the way the poets present those feelings? 8 marks. Now again, as I talked about, there is this hierarchical structuring of the paper that low ability students and high ability students should be able to access. Look at the question. It does not say, what are the similarities and differences between the speaker's feelings? It says, what are the similarities and differences between the way the poets present those feelings? In other words, how is language and structure and form used to present those feelings? And I would just quickly read through the poem. And for me, and there are different ways of doing this, but for me, I would just quickly look through the poem and try to pick out 2 or 3 things, looking at language, structure and form, of course, that I think are significant, and then I would start writing my answer. So let's have a look at the poem. Saddled with you for the afternoon, me and Paul ambled across the threadbare field to the bus stop, talking over Sheffield Wednesday's chances in the cup, while you skipped beside us in your ridiculous tank top, spouting 6-year-old views on Rotherham United. Suddenly you froze, said you hadn't any bus fare. I sighed, said you should go and ask Mum, and while you windmilled home I looked at Paul. His smile, like mine, said I was 9 and he was 10, and we must stroll the town doing what grown-ups do. As the bus crested the hill we chased Olympic gold. Looking back I saw you spring towards the gate, your hand holding out what must have been a coin. I ran on, unable to close the distance I'd set in motion. Something interesting about this poem then, let's just go through steps 1 to 5. On a simple level, what is happening? It's a story of this boy looking after his young brother reluctantly, and his brother goes home to get money for the bus, and the speaker just quickly hops on the bus with his friend and off they go. So simple, easy to understand. Then I would think about, as I talked about before, where are the words or phrases that seem to hint at a deeper meaning? Where are words or phrases that seem to be deliberately chosen for effect, where another word or phrase would have done, but the poet seems to have chosen that specifically? And I think one great example is the word saddled, a metaphor for carrying a burden. It's as if the brother feels he's almost like a horse having to carry his brother around. Threadbare as a metaphor for the relationship. The idea of the word threadbare, the threadbare field, we can interpret as a metaphor for the relationship between the 2 brothers. It is threadbare. Structurally, I think what's quite interesting is that the poem, just like Nettles, tells a very simple story but has this ambiguous final line that seems to bring the childhood event up to the present day. But I'm not sure I'll be able to bring that into the question about the relationships, but I just think it's interesting. What about the form? Well, this is actually very similar to a dramatic monologue. A dramatic monologue is a poem where the speaker speaks to somebody, but we never hear from the person being spoken to. So it fits that part of the dramatic monologue form, saddled with you. The you, the brother, we never hear from him, but this is spoken to the brother. But what we know about a dramatic monologue is that it cannot be written by the poet from a real life perspective. It has to be the poet taking on the persona of somebody else. And we don't know, because we don't know the context of this poem, but we could certainly say that it does have some of the elements of the dramatic monologue form. So for me, I would think, okay, clearly, just like the poem Nettles, there's an imbalance in this relationship. But in Nettles, that's presented through perhaps the structure, whereas this poem presents it through the form of the dramatic monologue and also some metaphors. And then I would jump right in. That process would have taken me a couple of minutes already. I've got no time to wait. I might write something like this. Both poets present imbalanced and unequal relationships. However, Scannell presents this through structure, whereas Forster subverts the dramatic monologue form and uses metaphor. The relationship in Brothers is clearly unequal. The poet presents this through the use of metaphor. The speaker notes that he was saddled with his brother on the day being described. The use of saddled is a metaphor suggesting that for the narrator to look after his little brother, it's as if he's having to carry him like a horse carries a rider. The relationship is clearly not a positive one. The speaker feels that he has to endure a burden to spend time with his younger sibling. Similarly, Scannell employs metaphor to present an imbalanced relationship. The use of military metaphor throughout the poem, spears, recruits, parade, suggests there's conflict in the relationship and therefore imbalance. So what I've done there is I said, here's the metaphor here, this was similar, and I've connective here to link them both together. Forster's use of form also suggests an imbalance in the relationship within the poem. Brothers can be read as a dramatic monologue. The speaker addresses his younger brother, saddled with you, but we never hear from the brother. This fits the form of a dramatic monologue, although we cannot be sure the poet is writing for the persona of a different character, as is essential. That aside, the way we only hear from one brother in the relationship suggests an imbalance and lack of equality between the two. The speaker in the poem appears to be domineering in the relationship, as the poem is so one-sided. And that's always what we would say about a dramatic monologue. It's what we would say about, My Last Duchess as a dramatic monologue. All of the dramatic monologues, that's how they work, this sort of one-sided nature of the relationship. A similar domineering relationship is presented in Nettles through the tightly controlled structure. The use of iambic pentameter, ABAB rhyme scheme, and organised quatrains suggests a level of control and domination in the relationship. There does not seem to be any equality between the father and son. And that would be it for me. I think that's probably what I could get done in 10 minutes, to think of those ideas and to quickly jot them down. So I hope you found this short video series useful. Just to say, as I go through a few of the slides here, my guide to English literature contains more on the 5-step process and also analysis of other unseen poems. So do pick up a copy, paperback on Amazon or ebook at mrbruff.com.